Beautiful morning today. It's great to see the sun again. I have this kind of theory that in Oregon we have a quota of nice days. I think we used up too much of our quota in February, so we're not seeing it now. Be that as it may, I turned 65 this year. And actually, my birthday is December 26th, so I turned 65 last year technically, but 2005 is the year in which I am 65. And it's nice having to be born on a decade, so you always can know what your birthday is. It's the same as the year. I'm sure a few people shake their heads into the same position. And as I reflect back over my life and look at how life has changed, how the way we live has changed over the last 65 years, it is really quite phenomenal. The technology has just accelerated so much during my lifetime. And things like televisions, cell phones, personal computers, things that we take for granted today, almost couldn't live without today, weren't there when I was a child. Air travel. When I was growing up, my first flight was when I was graduating from college. Air travel was really only for the rich at that time. And now we take air travel for granted. My grandson is 2 years old. My youngest grandson is 2 years old, and he's had about 4 flights already. And you know, it's just so changed so much over that period of time. And when we go back to my parents were both born around the turn of the century. My dad was born in rural West Virginia in the Appalachian Mountains. My mom was born in Winnipeg, which at that time was pretty much a small Midwestern, kind of a frontier Canadian town. And if you look at life where they lived it and when they lived it, when they were children, and compare it today in a West Coast suburb, it is just a totally different life. And that's in 100 years. But as much as technology has changed our lives and the way we live, I believe the bigger change has been in the way we think about things and the way we deal with people, both in our personal relationships and our business relationships. Which brings me to the subject of my talk today, which is business ethics in the 21st century. I would like to start with some history. From its inception, Western civilization received its ethics from the Judeo-Christian ethics code, which was something that had been around 2,000 years. And it's the businesses that the cornerstone of that was trust. And if people treat others, businesses treat their customers as they would want to be treated, then customers are going to trust them. Business at the turn of the century, and of course we had the robber barons, and so I'm not saying that business was always ethical, but at the turn of the century, when I go back to, like I say, when I was a child, we used to go down to the corner grocery store. My mom didn't drive. We'd go to the corner grocery store to buy our groceries, and they had a ledger. I mean, it was not like a Visa card. We had a ledger in that grocery store, and they would write down how much we bought, and we would pay it at the end of the month. A lot of trust there. We're neighbors, their neighbors, they live in the neighborhood. People trusted each other, and people trusted business. A lot of business deals, even large business deals, were done with a handshake. I recently read a transcript of an article by a professor of business ethics, which I'd like to read. I lost my microphone for the video. I was telling Roger when I came in, I'm a little bit concerned about being able to read in the dark here, because one thing about 65 is your eyes start to get bad. And this professor is a professor of business ethics, and this was part of a talk, so it doesn't read real fluently because it is a transcript of a talk. I got a great lesson in this from one of my grad students who came from Ethiopia. And he's a wonderful person, but when he came from Ethiopia, he had never seen a credit card. I took him out to lunch, and when I got up to pay the bill, I took out my credit card. He had never seen a credit card before, and he never understood how credit transactions worked. And I'm convinced to this day that when I signed the bill and we walked out of the restaurant, he was convinced that I had walked the check. I explained to him a little bit about the degree of trust that's necessary for credit transactions to take place, and he was stunned that the restaurant would actually trust the credit card company to pay their bill, and that the credit card company would actually trust me to pay the bill within 30 days. He said that in his country, one often exchanged goods where the seller has one hand on the goods and the buyer has one hand on the cash, and they both release them at the same time. Think about all the transactions that take place every day in our society that are premised on trust. Every time someone buys something on credit or ships goods on credit or does business over the internet, they presume a level of trust. But over the last century, this level of trust has started to erode, and the ethics code has changed to where today it's almost 180 degrees from what it was at the turn of the century. Today, the prevailing ethic code seems to be do what's best for you rather than what's best for somebody else or society, and in business, it's do what's best for the business. Some of you remember this, but in the mid-50s, the then chairman of General Motors was speaking before a Senate subcommittee and said something to the extent that what's good for General Motors is good for America. And the press really picked up on that and went after corporate America as being very greedy and selfish in that way. And even the comic strip Little Abner put in a character called General Bull Moose. And General Bull Moose's motto, following that, was whatever's good for General Bull Moose is good for the country. And this allowed him to rationalize doing almost anything, because if it was good for him, it was good for the country. Business ethics has really become a hot topic in the last couple of years. Corporate names such as Enron and WorldCom, Martha Stewart, have become synonymous with corporate America, kind of gone amok. What has been done to resolve the problem? Other than the fact that the press really went after individuals in a big way about putting their own pocketbooks ahead of the interests of shareholders and employees, what's happened is Congress has tried to legislate ethics in this country by passing laws such as Sarbanes-Oxley and other laws which require more stringent reporting requirements. Sarbanes-Oxley requires very extensive reporting requirements, and it also requires people that are kind of in the chain of command, or people like attorneys or accountants who are consultants, to report any wrongdoings by corporate officers or by the corporation. Has this worked? You're having trouble hearing? Okay. Good. I'll try to speak loud. Do wave, because I will tend to talk softer and softer. I'm more used to talking with I have a microphone and I can do that. Sarbanes-Oxley has a couple of problems. One problem is the cost. The cost is it's been staggering. I've read somewhere that it is costing business in this country billions of dollars a year in the extra reporting requirements. Moreover, it's sometimes not clear. I just received an article, or a magazine called Corporate Times, and the lead article in this month's magazine is about Sarbanes-Oxley, and it's reporting up the ladder. Unclear case law creates tough decisions. So like all laws, it takes a long time for the courts to interpret the laws, so it's not clear what is required under Sarbanes-Oxley, and that creates confusion. But more to the point where I am is that you cannot legislate ethics. Ethics has to come from personal moral codes that people have, and those moral codes have to have rights and wrongs. And those rights and wrongs have to be absolutes that guide our life. Since I'm a lawyer, I should do what Dave said and have a lawyer joke. But I don't exactly have a lawyer joke, but I have a lawyer, kind of a saying about lawyers that really just brings home this idea of having a line that something, a statute or a law like Sarbanes-Oxley does, where people will try to come up to that line now and try not to cross it. And that is a definition of a lawyer's lie is a lie that's so close to the truth that it can stand in the shadow of the truth. And if you think about it, that's how people think. That's how we perceive that business thinks and how they will treat something like Sarbanes-Oxley. The thing that I think is wrong with statutes like that, when you tend to legislate ethics or moral values, you do create this line, and all that really does is make people walk up to this line, try to walk up to this line and get as close to it, which means they'll always step over it. So to me, the only answer to that is, like I say, to have this code of personal ethics. I have another article I would like to read, if I can find it, because I kind of lost it here. which is, I just happened to run into this when I was preparing my talk, and it's by a fellow by the name of Ron Ward, who's the president of the Washington Bar Association. And this was in the Washington Bar Bulletin last month. And he's really writing about something a little bit different than this, but what he says is very applicable to this. He says, when lawyers place partisanship ahead of service and virtue, our society's ideals and the people within it wither. If you decide that your only role is to do what your clients tell you to do, you will be part of the destruction of a great nation, which is dying already from our stubborn refusal to look at life as more than an opportunity to get what we want. When a corporation or a business concern retains you, you have been entrusted with a certain responsibility for the lawful conduct of that business, its adherence to the law, and its ethics, or lack thereof, to the degree it transgresses the law. Recognition of this fact is why Sarbanes-Oxley is now a reality of law practice in America. There is no such thing as business ethics as opposed to regular ethics. Theft is theft. I think that's a kind of a profound statement. I'm sorry, it's a long, narrow room, and I don't know how well things carry in here, but I'll try harder. Last month's speaker was Patty Ross from Nike. And Patty brought this little booklet. And the booklet has 11 maxims that Nike wants its employees to live by. And maxim number 8 in this book is do the right thing. And Patty talked a lot about doing the right thing. And to me, I'm glad to see something like this. The fact that Nike considers that one of their 11 maxims of how they want their corporate culture to be is to do the right thing. That's a good sign. It means that corporate America understands what I'm talking about today and are trying to do the right things. Patty also went on to say that in her opinion, doing the right thing had to start with individuals, which goes back to my premise is that without some kind of a moral code, a personal moral code that we can adopt that sets rights and wrongs for our life and how we do everything in our life, our personal transactions and our business transactions, without that, we have no way to judge right and wrong. A lot has been written about over years about whether we are inherently know right and wrong, whether it's something we're born with. In other words, do we have a conscience? Is a conscience part of us? For the purpose of what I'm talking about today, I don't think that makes a lot of difference, because human nature is such that when tempted, when things we have to do something, we'll tend to deviate from that. We won't inherently go out and just shoot somebody. But we will do things that we know are wrong. Even if we do know they're wrong, we'll do them. And it's typically little things. Things like maybe cheating on an expense report, cheating on a test, and we tend to rationalize that away. And cheating on expense report, well, it's something that's small, the company can afford it, everybody's doing it, so we'll tend to rationalize things like that, and when we rationalize them, then it becomes a given. We've done it once, we've rationalized it, it's now okay to do it, so we'll do it over and over again. Plus, as we do that, we'll tend to accelerate what we'll do and get into things that may be bending the line a bit further. But ethically, cheating on an expense report is the same as embezzling millions of dollars. Ethically, they're the same. I obviously don't know Ken Lay, but I would imagine that the people that did know Ken Lay didn't consider him a bad person. Ken Lay was obviously in a business where the rules were bent a little bit, and as he worked his way up in Enron and became CEO, the rules that he bent became greater and greater to where the whole thing came down on him. But I believe that people like Ken Lay don't believe they're doing anything wrong. What they do from the start is what everybody around them's doing. Yeah, you're bending the rules, but that's what happens. That's what business does, and that's what this business does. And so they bend the rules, and with time, the rules that they bend get bigger and bigger. But all along, they feel, well, this is what business is. This is the way it works. This is the way business works, and they get caught up in that. So where does this personal ethics code that I'm talking about come from? Well, it can come from a lot of places. I'm a Christian, so my ethics code comes from the Bible. But all religions have ethics codes. And there are ethics codes that are outside of religions. And for that matter, even if somebody is not a Christian, the Bible is a great place to find an ethics code to live by. The key is that this code must have some absolutes, It must have rights and wrongs, and we must adhere to those rights and wrongs at all times. We don't compromise on them. We say, hey, this is what we should be doing, and now I'm being asked to step over the line, or if I do this, I'm stepping over the line. So you don't do it. You stay on the right side of the line. In my opinion, American business is sort of at a crossroads. When you go back to the story that I read about the person from Ethiopia, business in this country was built on trust, and that trust is eroding. And as that trust is eroding, laws like Sarbanes-Oxley are costing American businesses billions of dollars a year, which gets passed on to the consumer, which puts American business at a competitive disadvantage. So in my opinion, we are hitting close to a crisis point that has to change. Nike apparently sees this. Nike is trying to make these changes. But my premise is that it starts with individuals. So I'm going to challenge everybody here to establish their own code of professional ethics, that they will then use that code on a regular basis, both in their personal and in their business lives, in everything they do, and that this code have some absolutes that they're not willing to step across. I believe that if individuals do that, if the people in this room do it, if other business leaders do it, American business will be able to regain the trust of the American people. Thank you. It's our tradition here to have questions, so go ahead.
We work in the area that's a lot of different ethnic groups brings together. Mm-hmm. Background brings in different opinions of what's ethical and what's not. Any advice on how to best address that without confrontation?
Yeah. Oh yeah, you in a workplace. There's a lot of different ideas. Different people have different ideas of ethics or different ethics codes, and how do you address that? My premise is that it's a personal ethics code. You have your own personal ethics code that's based on what is some absolute rights and wrongs, and you don't step over that line. I'm not saying you have to push that ethics code on other people, but that's your ethics code. If you operate that way, if other business leaders start operating that way, eventually that's where business will go.
But a business itself has to set an ethic code also to trickle down to the employees, I feel.
Well, yeah. If a business does, and I think that's one of the things that Nike has done. They're saying, hey, do what is right. And if you were here last month and heard Patty's talk, that was a big part of what she talked about, how Nike has made an effort as a corporation to do the right thing and to let that, really determine how they make a lot of these corporate decisions. And of course, if a business does that, it's better. But the fact is, a lot of businesses aren't going to do that, but that doesn't mean that the leaders or even just people who aren't leaders in the business can adopt their own code. And if enough people do that with time, that will affect how, if you take the person that's on the counter in a store, if that person is honest, if that person treats his customers as that person want to be treated, then people are going to start to trust that store. So I think it starts with individuals. Definitely it helps when it's with a business also.
Just having a pamphlet doesn't always mean that that's the way it's going to be. You have to have the individual believe in and follow the pamphlet, I would assume.
That was not a question, really.
No.
I'm not going to repeat it, but I think everybody heard it.
Smack.
Bernie.
You're saying Sarbanes-Oxley is really expensive for business. What about the flip side of the equation? If they could prevent an Enron or a WorldCom or something like that happening, scare management enough to do that. I mean, could it be worth it? And as far as competing with other countries, other countries, if they're not operating as good as they even want to because of the law, maybe that's an advantage for us. Like you talked about I think it was the African person, they don't trust each other.
I'm obviously not going to really knock Sarbanes-Oxley too much. It's a lawyer's full employment law. It really is. This thing is going to be litigated for the next 20 years. And that's what this article is totally about. There are two articles in here. This is just this month's issue of this Corporate Legal Times. It goes to corporate lawyers. One article in here is interpreting Sarbanes-Oxley and the litigation that's taking place and how much trouble they're having interpreting. The next article is about lawyers who worked for Enron, WorldCom, so forth, companies that disappeared because of ethics problems, now trying to find work in the workplace, and nobody will hire them. So if you're an engineer at WorldCom, people will hire you right away. They don't care. But if you're a lawyer, they tie you to that ethics. And so, yeah, what happened to those companies has created a stigma in American business. And Sarbanes-Oxley was necessary, and it is a solution. But in my mind, it's not the ultimate solution, and it's not the right solution.
Years ago, our economy was not global, and now it's more global, and you have the cross of the different cultures of all over the world that have different standards. How is that ever going to come back to, I mean, it's a melting pot, it's going down, 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 and I don't understand how it'll ever go up.
There's no question America is part of a global economy. There's no question about that. I think there's no question that different cultures have different ethic standards. That was the story from the Ethiopian. Different cultures have different standards, and the standard we grew up in had some very definite ethics codes. But that doesn't mean that America can't continue to be what it's been. That doesn't mean that America can't have can't be ethical in the way it does business. And it can't, I think it can do that and compete competitively with the rest of the world. It's going to be constantly bucking heads with that. And we're not going to, as a country or as a group of people, enforce our moral codes on the rest of the world. But that still doesn't mean that as a country we have to say, well, the world's changing around us, therefore we have to change with it.
So just to follow up on that, don't you think, though, that corporations have to set a standard, particularly if they're multicultural, to give people a sense of how they should ethically do business?
Yeah.
They have to.
Yeah. The question was,
they're not going to have multicultural businesses that are going to be successful in terms of their ethics standards.
the question was, do corporations have to set standards? Yes, they do, and that's what Nike's doing here. These maxims, there are 11 of them, and they're basically saying, hey, this is what we want Nike's corporate culture to be. And yes, I think businesses have to do that. But again, even that will only work if the individuals in the business adhere to that and have some motivation. Because there's all kinds of cross motivations. And somebody in the business, somebody starts out and comes to work for Nike. They're less interested in Nike and Nike's culture than they are in their own advancement. Okay? That's going to be their number one motive is advancement in Nike. So they're going to do what they think is necessary to advance. Now, if Nike says that's being ethical, then they'll be ethical. But if Nike doesn't say that and doesn't say it in so many words, then they'll do what they have to do. And that's why I think people need their own personal moral codes. Because every business doesn't do this. Every business doesn't have the 11 maxims that kind of set forth what we want our culture to be. And I think Nike just happens to be a business that, like Patty said last month, it's a relatively young business. For the size it is, it's a very young business, and it has some very definite culture. The individuals that formed it are still there.
More of a comment than a question. It's interesting because I'm a CPA, and I find it's kind of funny because attorneys have been the brunt of all the jokes with host operators and all of that. Now we are the brunt of the jokes, which I never would have thought, because we're considered a pretty ethical, I think, occupation. But it's interesting. In my career, I've worked for different, I've been CFOs and worked for different CEOs, where people talk about the ethics, but when I have to make a decision that costs the company money because of an ethical thing, I've been faced with both responses. One is I really support that, and yes, it would cost us more, and the other is, they want to play on the slippery slope, and then you have to draw the line in the sand and decide either do you stay, do you go, how do you deal with that? I'm sure I'm not the only person here to face those. I think as CFO sometimes, you're in a position to deal with a lot of financial things, and money is just so tempting to people, and you talk about the temptation, and I believe that's what happened with all of this. I've worked in the big six accounting world, and the money that's involved there, and the temptation to keep the client, to bill the fees, to have them like you, to be happy with what you do, just got so great for people that just exactly what you said, Chuck, they didn't wake up that morning and say, I'm going to do fraudulent things. It's like they just kept the sheep nibbling off the path, they just kept going and going until ultimately the whole thing, just exploded because the stakes got so huge.
I think Debbie probably projects better than I do, but since she's facing this way, some people back there might not have heard her. Debbie's an accountant, and she's saying when she was when working in an accounting firm where you're representing people who are coming to you for advice or wanting you to do things, how do you balance it's difficult to balance the saying, well, I want to do what's right, I want to tell my clients to do what's right, and clients saying, well, gee, we want to save money, or we want to make money. And I think what Ron Ward here, I want to read this last part again. When a corporation or business concern retains you, you have been entrusted with a certain responsibility for the lawful conduct of that business, its adherence to the law and its ethics or lack thereof, and to the degree it transgresses the law. So, yeah, it's a tough call, and that's exactly what he's talking about in this article as professionals, but I think it's true as to business leaders in working in corporate settings. We have individual obligations to have our own code of ethics and to stick by that code of ethics for whatever the consequences are, and it's not always easy, and it's going to cause problems. But the fact is that if people don't do that in this country, we are eventually, like the gentleman over here said, we're eventually going to come down to the lowest level, which has not really been what's made, like going back to the start, what's kind of made business in this country work is this trust. And as the American public starts to lose this trust in business, then business is going to pay the consequences. Again, all of this is sort of my personal opinion. There's not, there's no rights and wrongs in any of this, and these are my opinions about having, as a practicing lawyer, reading a lot about in trade magazines about what's happened since Enron. I mean, this is where it really happened, is when Enron went down. This brought a lot of public awareness to what's going on in business, and that business hasn't been ethical, that businesses have been doing what's best for them at the expense of everybody else, including the shareholders in the business and the employees in the business. You would think that business leaders would be trying to do what's best for the shareholders. That's their job, but they're not. And so that's what's got everybody's attention, and a lot of solutions to that, and what I'm talking about is sort of my own personal solution. So people can certainly disagree with this, but to me, and from my point of view, legislating ethics will never make people ethical.
Well, I mean, kind of a comment and a little kind of a contrapoint. It's not true that part of the problem is that everybody has their own opinion and we have to be tolerant. And it's what somebody said, that it is the dictatorship of relativism. Oh, this good, you're true. Hey, we respect everybody's opinion, and every opinion is equal. I think unless we start coming to there is some absolute truths, correct? Should not kill. That's like legislating ethics, correct? I mean, there's an action that follows if you kill someone, and it's in the law, and it's not any different from some other things that we have decided to make it optional. Are we not promoting the problem by saying that everybody has their own opinion and everything is relative and not hold to some specific universal truth?
I'm thinking the same sort of question about, years ago I was a student of Ayn Rand, and I've come to believe that she was right in many ways, and that this general you mentioned is probably right too, and what is good for me is good for everyone. The problem is, what I want is not what's good for me. We need to build a code of ethics on what's good for us. Do you think that can happen with everyone wandering around, following Ayn Rand, or we have to find the basis for the ethic code. You think that that can be done in other? Do you think there are many ways to get to there?
A couple of questions that basically, one of them is what I'm saying possible? And is there a single ethics level? Is there a single place where there's rights or wrong? I answer the second question first, because from my perspective, there is, but then I'm looking at it from a Christian perspective. So yes, I have a set of standards, which to me are absolutes, and they're set out in the Bible. So to me there are. No, to the rest of the world there's not. So everybody's going to have sort of their own ethics code. The thing is that what you can't have is what you'll call situational ethics. My ethics will change depending on the situation. In other words, I'll do what's good for me, and so if it's good for me, if today I put my line here, but if it requires me to do something over here tomorrow, I'll do that. If it requires me to go over here the next day, I'll do that. Because my ethics system follow what's good for me rather than some standard. And all I'm saying is what we need to do as individuals is develop standards. Because I believe we do inherently know what's right and wrong. So I believe people do know when they're doing wrong. They do know when they step over that line, but they tend to rationalize it. And they rationalize it. It's easy. We rationalize everything we do. We rationalize when we go off our diet. We rationalize when we smoke when we shouldn't smoke. Everything we do that we know we shouldn't do, we rationalize it away. That's just the way we're built. So we tend to know when we're doing something that we shouldn't be doing. Take my two examples that were very simplistic examples. Cheating on a test and cheating on expense report. I think everybody that cheats on a test know they shouldn't cheat on a test. And it's more than what you're saying. It's more than, yeah, the professor will catch you, you'll flunk the class. It's more than that. You know it's wrong. You know you really shouldn't be cheating on the test. But you do it. And the same, cheating on the expense report. You know it's stealing. You're stealing money from the company. But people will cheat on expense report because it's small, because everybody does it. So yeah, what I'm saying is I think we need to have some absolutes. And those absolutes are going to be different for different people, and where they get their absolutes from are going to be from different places. But I believe they're all going to fall out pretty much in a pretty narrow band.
So just one final comment. I think you've actually made a very good case for us as individuals to drive ethical change in corporations. And unless a corporation has an ethical position, such as Intel, with business process ethics course needing to be taken by 85,000 employees every year as a refresher, until you drive that up through the corporation, I don't think as an individual doing the right thing, you're going to somehow influence all the other individuals to do the right thing. I think you have to drive it through the corporation. I think you've made a point for that, actually.